All right. Hey, good evening. Welcome to Sunday Evening Live. If you're watching us over Facebook Live, you're not seeing us right now because Facebook isn't working, but Thomas has us on YouTube. So welcome. Again, I'm so thankful for Thomas and his ability to be able to shift things around and do things differently. And so we're thankful for that. Chris is back, came in from
Franklin.
Yep. Oh, man.
The mighty city of Franklin.
The mighty city of Franklin. So here he is. He's back with us, and Gabe's back, who we're not talking to anymore. For those of you that did not hear. Shun. We're shunning you, boy. Gabe did turn in his resignation this morning. His last Sunday here will be the 26th, I believe it is. He's heading back to the hills of Tennessee. I'll share his address here in a minute, and everybody can go paper his house or something.
Send him.
No, you don't want paper houses in the COVID world, man. You need all that stuff.
Yeah.
So,
You bring it on. I will do like others have before and save it.
But with that in mind, we're going to miss Gabe. He just fit right in. It's like man, you'd always been here in that, and I was just getting used to his accent. I was getting so I could understand him. So anyway, it is what it is. So Chris, you and I guess we'll just keep plugging along, my friend.
Chicka.
There we go. But I thought we talked about a little bit earlier in the week, knowing this was coming down, talking about God's will. How do we know God's will for our lives? And God's will, a lot of times we'll go up to people, well, we know God's will for your life is this. And I would say just stay here, but I'm not going to argue against what God's told you. But how do we know God's will? And I think that's it. People want to know. How can I know? Christians, everybody wants to know, how do I know what God wants me to do? How do I know this? And really it's a good question, and it's a hard question to answer in many ways, because how do you know? There are so many, we're told to discern the spirits, right? You've got Satan telling you one thing, through the world, through circumstances and different things, then you have God. And so how do you know? And so that's I think let's just deal with that topic. We've got Mr. Thomas Miller, who's going to be jumping in with us on all of this. We've got him up here. So now y'all can see him too, just as we can. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them, and Thomas will make sure and get those to us, and we'll try our best to answer them. If we can't, we'll just be honest and go, don't know. So let me just throw it out there. How did you know, Chris, it was in God's plan, God's will for your life, for you to be in the ministry? We'll just go with the ministry, because a lot of people know, I don't know what I'm supposed to do in life. And so you could equate this to ministry, you could equate this to any job that's out there in that. How did you know it was God's will for you to be in the ministry?
I think that the subjective decisions like that one, subjective meaning it doesn't depend on like some kind of truth right out of the Bible, like, do not lie. You want to know God's will? Tell the truth. That's pretty easy. And a lot of this, a lot of God's will is already in the Scriptures. Probably 95% of what we need to know in life is just right there in the Bible. But those decisions that we have to make, well, there's no verse that it says, Chris, thou shalt go into the ministry. God has spoken. You
didn't get that FedEx like I did?
I did not. So,
Dave, you got it right.
I've been shunned.
Yeah. We'll get to you later. But looking back, as far as a call to ministry, that is not something I always wanted to do. As a matter of fact, when I graduated from high school, I started college at Mary Hardin Baylor over here in Belton. I had no idea what I was going to do. I considered like dentistry. I thought maybe I'll be a dentist. And then I saw some pictures of like periodontal disease, and I thought, nah, I'm not going to be a dentist. Not for me, you know. Then I heard some nightmares about dental school, and they thought it was harder than med school, or that some doctors go. I'm like, man, definitely not for me. But so I thought maybe I would study business, but I really didn't know. And so I'm the oldest of 5. And my parents said, buddy, you got one shot because there's 4 more coming behind you. And that really got my attention. I went to the Lord in prayer first. I had a decision I needed to make. It involved a significant, course of my life. Mm-hmm. And so I went to the Lord in prayer and I said, God, I've got to know. I know you've got a plan. I want to walk in it, and I don't know what it is. And I did not get an immediate answer. I didn't get an answer the next week. I didn't get an answer the next 2 weeks. And so all through this, though, I was spending daily time with the Lord. I was in prayer daily. I was in the Scriptures daily. And I wasn't necessarily looking for an answer every day to that question, what do I be when I grow up? But I was looking for the Lord Himself. And I really do think that with the decisions that we have to make, where there's not a verse that we can claim, is really we go about looking for God Himself first, looking to know Him better through the Scriptures, looking to know Him better through prayer, being involved in your local church. I was serving in my local church. I think I was teaching 8th grade boys Sunday school at the time. That was an adventure. Oh boy. And so I was involved in ministry already, just serving and fellowshipping with believers. And so there were a lot of pieces that were already in place. And I would say that if we're wanting to know what God's will is, but we're not willing to look for God Himself first, then the chances of us discovering it they get lower, I think. Mm-hmm. Well, as I was going along praying, one of the things that just people out of the blue who never should have asked me any questions about, what I wanted to be, began to ask me strange things like, have you ever thought about going into the ministry? I mean, it was like one of my grandmothers that I just didn't have a whole lot of spiritual conversations with her. I'm working in her flower bed one day, and out of the blue, she asks me this. I'm like, well, no, and then the job I had at the time, my boss and boss's wife, out of the blue, just, have you ever considered going into the ministry? Like, no, but you're the second odd person to ask me that. And so these things just began to line up. I got a call from somebody. It was an opportunity to do some youth ministry stuff, help out with the Disciple Now weekend. Then I got a call from things began to fall into my life, and I began to sense in my heart that maybe this was a direction God was leading me. I didn't know for sure, and I'm not I've had this on my mind for 5 minutes, thus shall it be. I just don't step out and make decisions that way, that quickly. But in time, God began to confirm in lots of ways that this indeed was the direction He wanted me to go. And so I look back, and it was a lot of things put together. It was in the Word, studying the Scriptures. It was on my knees in prayer daily. It was fellowshipping with believers. It was serving in my local church. And it was just following God, and in His time, He answered that question for which I didn't have a verse. And I went into the ministry and it's 22 or so years ago, maybe 23, I'm not sure, but just haven't looked back. And I don't know that there's anything else I could do. So that's my path.
Oh, that's good. I mean, and really that's it. I mean, God just laying it out slowly. And path is it. It's a walk. It's not like boom here. It's a progression of you going down the line. And a lot of people think, did I miss the call of God? There might be some folks that, maybe God didn't mean for Gabe to come to First Baptist Church Troy. I would highly disagree with them because of the fact that, yes, you were. And what people don't realize, I think, is that God's calling doesn't mean this is what it's going to be forever. God moves us into different things, whether it's jobs or whatever, because each thing we go into is we learn, we grow, and God uses that for the next deal. And I definitely think you being here was without a fact of God. Chris can tell you. I mean, when Chris told me there was somebody from Tennessee looking here, I said, chunk that paper. Not that I had anything against you. I'm going, does this boy know how big Texas is, and the driving and what he's going to have to do and all that, if he's going to be driving back and forth from Fort Worth and all that. But all of a sudden it was like, oh, look where God has put and how he has done, and here it is. Your call to the ministry. And not only that, but the call now of God for this next step.
Yeah, that shift. Yeah, so mine, I was a bit younger. I was only about 12, and I accepted Christ when I was 10, and then at about 12, I start getting. God starts working in my heart, and I don't really know what the deal is. I didn't know what was going on. And I kept going through in prayer, praying, like, I'm saved, right? I know that I'm saved. I'm good there. So, and there was always peace about that. So I was like, but what is it? What's going on? It's not really conviction, but it's getting my attention. And then a guy who's a little bit older than me, by a few years, but we had known each other, played some basketball together and things. He announced his call into the ministry. I was like, I'll consider this. I didn't say a word to anybody though. I just kept my mouth shut. I don't talk about things like that. I just kept quiet, and I said, okay. And then I followed a lot of what Chris did. I was spending a whole lot of time just reading the Bible. I was a whole lot of time alone and praying, and had no idea what direction I was going in. And finally, after dealing with that for a month or 2 months, just by myself and quiet, I go to my dad and I said, I think I'm getting called to preach. I think that's where I'm getting called. And it was like this huge emotional release. That conversation was one of the most emotional conversations I've ever had in my life. And my dad was really, he was wise in how he advised me, and just confirming, saying, okay, I just want to make sure, because a lot of people feel led to go into ministry, and then that's not where God leads them to go. So let's work through this a little bit. Let's talk about tell me about your experience. And he was just real with me. And then he said, okay, now do you want to tell your mom? I was like, I can't do that again, man. But so then they scheduled a time for me to talk with my pastor. And then, in that conversation, well, afterwards, in between there, my dad said, I had felt like I was led into ministry, but God had confirmed to him that he was not. That's not the path that God wanted him to go, but that he was going to raise a child who would be in ministry. He said, I didn't know which one of you boys it would be. I didn't know how it would be. I didn't know when it would be. I just know that it would be. I said, okay. So then we go to my pastor, and my pastor, he was new. He had been there for less than a year, and a younger guy, and we're talking, and it's just me and him in his office. And then he starts telling me, he says, okay, just talk to me about where you're at. And so we go through that conversation. He says, I want to share something with you. You got up and you answered questions in Bible school, and I knew that God he was going to do something with you. He said, I didn't want to say anything then. He said, but you're bringing this out now. He said, I'm not saying that God definitely wants you to be a preacher. I'm just saying I think that God does want something for you. But it was very interesting, because he had also felt led to do the ministry at 12. He announced his call when he was 13. He'd been pastoring for a number of years, and so just spend time with him. And then there was a peace. Me and him prayed, and there was an absolute, that moment of peace, and that's where God wanted me to go. And I said, okay. So I just, I surrendered to that call, and he scheduled a sermon date that night and said, okay, then let's try this out. And that was the same pastor that licensed me when I was 17. He said, all right, I really feel like it's time to license you to go into, with ministry and to show that we support you in this. I said, okay. And so there's that was, okay, this is the definite direction that God wants me to go in my life. But then there was a shift at about that, at 24. God really, I'd been involved with youth ministry for a few years, and I'd been in and out of, different churches doing pulpit supplies and things like that. I'd always served in that capacity. But an intentional ministry with youth for about 4 years, and then God gets hold of me and leads me to go to school, and so that's when I go to get my bachelor's degree, and then so I go through Moody, and then halfway through that, it's I need you to you're going to go to seminary. Okay, we'll do that then, and so that's kind of how it started to shift into the focus of eventually you're going to be in vocational ministry. The thing about for Christianity is I'm just talking to everybody here for a sec, is all of us are called to full-time ministry in our lives. We're called to a day in and day out, as a Christian, to be a witness for Jesus Christ. And how that looks, some of us are called into a position where that becomes our job as well, our daily job. But for all of us, at the very least, there is a daily calling to serve and witness for Christ. So when I say vocational ministry, that's what I mean, though, is where you move into that as your job. And but it got to a point where I knew that I had to work until I finished my bachelor's. God just kept confirming that as I kept trying to force His hand in going to churches and things and looking for churches to apply to be a minister of some sort, youth minister or new gen pastor, whatever, some people call it different things. And still serving at that same church in Vonore during this time. And then God led me to move to Texas and go to seminary and come to First Baptist. And so it was a regional thing. It was kind of weird. It's, hey, you remember that place you visited a few years ago that you and your wife liked so well? You need to consider that. And that got me looking at schools. And then that is what got me looking at Southwestern. And every step I looked at just about every evangelical seminary that I could find in the United States, and talked it over with, kept praying about it, kept talking it over with Shay, and then that's what led us here. Eventually, God just confirmed Southwestern as a school. So there was that regional decision. And it says, okay, now that I'm going to go to the seminary, where do I serve? And that's what led me to First Baptist, because there's a whole lot of stuff that goes with it. These guys know about all that other stuff that just kind of confirmed that this is where I was supposed to be. And now, my family's just at a point where, and I don't want anybody thinking this is just because of the coronavirus or anything like that. That's why we're going to move back to Tennessee. This has been going on within our family, just some needs and being drawn back to Tennessee has been going on for a while, and that's just something that's been going on in the heart of our family right now. And it came to a point where we had to make a choice at what was best for our family, and what was going to be obedience to God. Chris made a fantastic point that 95% of God's will is already in the Scriptures. And God says that you got to put your family before the church. God says you got to put your family before yourself. As a man, that's your role. And so you got to serve. I love school. I do. I love school, and I love where I'm at, and I love being able to go. But if where my family needs to be and where God wants us to be is in a different location than where I'm at school, then that's something that needs to be laid aside. So I won't get to physically go to Southwestern, but there's a compromise in the programs that they have, so that I can still go to Southwestern just from a distance, and that's okay. So it's another regional thing. It's we need to be drawn back to this area, and as we've confirming that that's where God wants us to be. It's okay. How does God want us to serve? Where does God want us to serve? And that's the steps that it seemed to take it. Over the years, this is where God wants us to go. Now, how do we serve Him in this area? And that's how we're moving through. I wish it was simple and clear cut. That would be killer, but
that would be good, wouldn't it?
But it's not.
Yeah.
It's a process. It takes time.
It is. It's again, it's a path. It's walking a path. Thomas, do we have any questions or anything that you see? No, not that. Okay, and again, we've talked about vocational ministry in that, but the secular. I mean, we're called to do things in the secular world too. That's and I think that people don't realize that. They just, again, think of call in the ministry, as you said. And that, Thomas, what about you? How do you, in God's calling in your life to where you're at right now?
Well, that's a fair question. I keep hearing echoes of myself if I don't take my headphones off, so sorry. I think it's a question of, I don't know if we'll be locked into lifelong careers sometimes. And I think that God will sometimes use us, even if it is for a brief second, to accomplish that one task. That's what's worth it. Mm-hmm. So in your case, coming here and then having to leave, I'm more than confident to say that you have fulfilled a specific task that was needed to happen in your service here. And the series, you actually did a series in 2018, finding the will of God in your life. It's what kind of Chris said as well. 99.9% of what you need to fulfill His will is in the Bible. Are you studying the Bible? Are you seeking Him in prayer daily? And as far as me personally, I still have this mindset of, we're still settling. And at some point in life, I've got to look back and say, no, we've made a decision, or we need to light, somewhere. But always be ready for that call in case we're asked to move on and verify it's through God. And I can say all of our moves that we've made, I think, have been sought in prayer, and I'm more than confident we're His will. And so that's the best way I can describe it for myself. I'm not being necessarily in clergy or any type of specific vocational ministry. That's how it's affected me. Every church I've been to, I've had something to do with media, and so I think that's been a probably intentional part of my upbringing, and what I've learned was media and computers. Well, it's worked for 3 churches I've been at that I was able to use it to help benefit them in some way. So, interesting. I don't know.
Yeah, so God uses the talents you have and brings you in, and brought you here to the TV station that you're at. We don't like to promote or advertise any TV stations, but from 1 to 10, how would you rank it? I'd say probably a 10. And so anyway, we're not going to. But it is amazing how God brings it so He can accomplish things. I think again, that's what people don't understand. It's not always a permanent thing. Look at some of the minor prophets of the Old Testament. They're there, and they're gone. You never hear it, but they accomplish in that moment in time what God. I think that's what we need to ask ourselves. What's God wanting to accomplish through my life in this moment in time? And the rest of it will come. He'll open those doors. He'll do some things like that. As we seek God's will. The last thing I ever want to do is go into the ministry. Nope, don't want to do it. I did feel the call as a young age, thought about it. Quite honestly, went and talked. My parents took me to talk to a pastor. Pastor looked at me and said, "You don't even speak in public to anybody." He said, "I think you need to rethink this."
Wow.
Yeah, that was just like, oh. But I look back now, and there for a while I was angry about that, but I look back and that probably was one of the wisest things. God used that. Because truthfully, this boy wasn't ready for anything, and I needed to learn some other things. I was in the secular world. I was in banking. All those things I learned from there, God has used in my ministry. I would never have gotten those things. And I remember God moving me in. I was in banking, and we started going to a church, and a friend of ours was there, and he was youth minister, and one day he said, "Well, I'm leaving," and I'd helped out a couple of times with the youth, and the people said, "Well, would you mind stepping in?" "Yep, that's just temporary. Find somebody." "Okay, you're an interim." There's no such thing as an interim youth minister. And so I go and start doing that, and next thing I know, they said, "Well, would you like to be the full-time?" "Well, yeah, as long as it doesn't mess up with other stuff I want to do, sure, I'll do that." Very spiritual guy. And but in it all, God started using us. like, this is where I need to be. I could go to the bank, and I wasn't happy.
Yeah.
The moment I stepped in, I started doing ministry. There was a peace, there was a happiness. And that's why I tell people, hunt for that. When you're in God's will, there's going to be that peace and happiness. And I kept thinking, this is where God wants me to be. I didn't even talk to Kathy about it. And it was just weighing on me. And finally, I kept making deals with God. You know, it's kind of like the fleece, and he kept answering it. I'm going, oh my soul. Finally, my last deal I made with him was, I said, I told him, I said, if Kathy mentions it to me, I will do it. I never mentioned it to her. We're going down 317, back when there was nobody on 317, middle of the night, dark. I'm driving along, and Kathy just looks at me and says, God's calling you in the ministry, isn't he? I literally almost wrecked the car. I mean, you know, it's just
Jesus
yes.
took the wheel, right?
Jesus took the wheel, right? Goodness. And it was like, oh man, yes, he is. That next Sunday, we had, every time our youth come forward, I would go up with them and sit and help be there with them. And we had the youth come forward, had led him to the Lord, and he was up, and the pastor was introducing him to the church. And I remember this as plain as day, and I felt like you need to go up there. You need to go up there also and let the church know. And I'm going, no, God, this is that's his. And that's when the Bell County earthquake happened. I don't know, you probably don't remember that. Nobody remembers it, because I'm sitting there and everything starts shaking. I mean, I promise you, everything was shaking. And I'm going, oh Lord, it's an earthquake. What's going on? And I'm looking around, and there are people doing this, just, yeah, we're glad to have you. And I'm going, folks, there's an earthquake going on. I mean, I'm doing this. And I promise you, there was a voice. I mean, you don't hear voice, you know, and that people go, oh, did you hear the voice of God in that? I'm going, no, there's other way. But God spoke to me that day, and it was basically this: if you don't get up there, I'm going to move the pew up there. Which do you want? And I got up, and I, said, okay, here's the situation. I'm going to surrender to the ministry, which ticked my mother off. Not that I surrendered to the ministry; it's the fact she wasn't there that Sunday. Because it was the same church she went to. But after that, how God just opened up into seminary. I mean, I'm 33 years old, ironically. And I give my paper to I send in for admission to the seminary after the time you're supposed to do it. I'm thinking, I'm clear. Nobody's going to call me because it'll be the next semester. No, I get a phone call. Vice President, hey, we'd like to meet you and your wife. Will you come down or come up? I'm going, okay, so we go up there. He spends more time talking to Kathy. They're having a good time doing that. And I'm there. Finally, when it's done, he said, we don't let people in this late. But there's just something about your application, something about what you had. You start in 2 weeks.
Get your books.
Get your books. Yeah. And God just constantly opening things like that up, in spite of me trying to close the doors, and that's what he does. In those things. And, that's our call, and that's how, whether it's in the secular or in the vocational ministry. But for, how much time we got, Thomas? We're about...
Approximately, probably 2 minutes.
Okay, a couple of minutes there. What advice would you give for those folks? Man, what does God want for my life? Whether it is a vocation, who they're going to marry, anything like that. Those important, and I guess there's really no unimportant thing in their life. Everything ends there. What advice would you give?
I would say that to remember that God doesn't hide His will in some kind of labyrinth or maze or under some bush and laugh while we look for it, because He knows everything and we don't. The reality is that He loves us. He's got a plan for us. And it requires faith. And I think that I would just pull what I've heard out of all three of our and some things Thomas mentioned is number one, make sure you're pursuing knowing Christ, because His will is going to come out of that. And we know Christ through time with Him, in the Word, in prayer, fellowshipping with other Christians, serving and sharing our faith. And as we go about doing those things, in His time, He'll make it clear. And I would say, pursue knowing the Lord and do what you know that He has already given you to do. And the decision that you need to make, it'll happen. And you make, the hardest ones I think are when you come down to like, you've got two good decisions. I could do this, looks good. I could do this, it looks good. God, what do I do? Because I can't live in a world where they're both good. Surely one's wrong and one's right. Maybe not. Sometimes I really do think that God says, seek me, love me, be in my word, worship, fellowship with other believers, pray and make a decision, and trust me. Those are the hard ones because I think they take the most faith. And so if you find yourself in a situation like that, where it's very like, man, what do I do? They're both great. You know, God, where can I have the greatest impact for your kingdom, the greatest impact for your name? And unless you just drop something on me, I'm going to decide and I'm going to trust that you're good, you're sovereign over all things, you're in control. I'm going to make a decision and roll with it. I think that's the way to go about it.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm with you. That's
I might have used all two of our minutes there. I'm sorry.
I've been in that boat. I'm
Yeah.
in that boat. I mean, you know, it's what Chris saying is absolutely right. It's in all of it, people in all the conversations, it's people seeking God's will. It is that daily time. It's looking for affirmations. If you're seeking a will, there's affirmations that come up, especially in vocational ministry. There's those things that show, yeah, this is where I want you to go. Okay, awesome. So I would say look for those things, but one is the last thing that I would add to it would be timing. I always wanted the big picture. Give me the whole picture. And my grandfather, who is a pastor and has been pastoring for 40 years now, he told me not that long ago, probably in the past couple of years, he says, why do you think God wants to give you the whole picture at once? Just take the one step He gives you. You know, if he may only give you one step at a time, just take that step. So it goes in line with what Chris is saying about faith. Let God work out His timing. There's a reason that I wasn't in vocational ministry at 22. I needed to learn things. I needed to be matured by Christ, and I needed to learn things here at First Baptist before moving on and moving back. And I get to carry that back with me now. I mean, there's so much things that I've learned in a year here, in church ministry and youth ministry, adult ministry, the whole gambit, children's ministry, that I was not aware of. But God allowed me the opportunity to learn it, and I honestly believe so that I can apply that in a pastoral setting back home. Because now I'm better equipped to equip other saints, and that's part of the role of a minister.
Okay. All right. Thomas, you got any words on this?
Whether they're wise words, I don't know, but we'll see. We'll see where this goes. First off, you said you were 32, 33, and that was only 3 years ago. So
That's it.
This is what ministry does to you.
That's what working with music and youth ministers does to you.
He's only 36 years
Ministry and
old.
seminary will do that right there.
But I think Gabe kind of touched on it, is you're not going to often see the big picture, and that's typically not how I've seen God work. We often think, well, God, show me a sign of what you want me to do. Show me this sign, and often it's, well, take an assessment of, as Chris said, are you in the Word? Are you seeking His guidance daily? Are you, seeking His will in that way? But then, if you're doing those things, well, then take an assessment of your own skill set. What skills do you have that you can apply right now? What's that low-hanging fruit? That doesn't mean to say that's going to be your future. You're always going to be that guy who does this one specific thing, but it means that you apply what you have in the now. You live in that moment of what can I do right now for God, which then opens the door as time progresses. You'll have other opportunities given to you to continue. My favorite saying is a guy I work with who's probably in his early 60s who says, when I grow up, I want to do this, because he's in this mindset, and it's a good positive mindset. He's like, I never stop learning and I'm always growing, and it's, I think we have to apply that mindset to even our Christian walk of, hey, I don't know what you have for me in store to do tomorrow or the next day, but right now I have this opportunity in front of me to do something. Help me here, Chris. What's that song? One day at a time.
It.
One day at a time.
That's
We're
it.
going to close on song. No, it's like one day at a time. You take one day at a time with what's available to you. I think that's probably the key. Don't look for the big map. Look for what can I do right now.
I think, as we seek God's will, as we close this out, the one thing, and we've all said, we all want the big picture. If we're not willing to take the small steps, we're not going to be willing to do the big picture. The other thing, too, I think of is that I think if God did show us the big picture, it'd scare the daylights out of us.
You're absolutely
That's
right.
it. So that's
Yeah.
why the one step at a
Yeah.
time.
That's right.
And it's like, in lifting weights, you got to start with the little to get up there. God's getting you ready. You're not ready for that. If you're ready for that, you will be there. And so, patience.
Yeah.
It's patience. That's one of the qualities of God. Thank you. Is patience. And it's a quality He would have us to have as He builds in, and that's a term, builds into our lives the things that we need in our lives for us to accomplish those things that He has for us in that big picture. And quite honestly, I don't know if we ever know what the big picture is. All I know is right now in life, I'm a pastor at this church. 5 years from now, what is God going to have me here as a pastor, or is God going to have me doing something else? But because I was here, it opened the door to that. We're all on the path. I think we look at it, this is going to be the final. No, we don't. This isn't until we get to heaven, it's not final. I like the way Henry Blackaby said, God speaks through His Word, through prayer, through other people, Christian people, and through circumstances. And I think in all of our lives, that's exactly how He's worked. But again, I think the wise words, if you're not seeking God, you're not going to find His will. That's the key. You've got to be doing that. So seek God. That's if you want to know His will, you've got to seek Him first. Then you'll know it. Hey guys, thank y'all. Glad you made it back.
Yes, glad to be back.
From the big city of Franklin. Gabe, I'm still not talking to you. No. Again, folks, let me encourage you, if Gabe's blessed your life, just email him, let him know some way, give him a call, let him know how much because he's truly been a blessing. God did bring him here for the season. He's made us a better church because of that. And now then, we seek God's will for where we go next. Thomas, I am so glad, my friend, that God brought you to this area, brought you to this church, because we wouldn't be able to do this if we didn't, and the skills that He's given. And God's given you some skills. Apply them today. If you want to know His will, start applying those today and watch Him open the doors. Thank you for joining us. Y'all have a blessed evening.